5 people walked up to the host stand, dressed like money that had never once been questioned. I stepped in front of them and said the restaurant was full. It was not full. Half the dining room sat empty behind me. The host looked at me like I had switched languages mid-sentence. My manager came around the corner within a minute, demanding to know why I had just turned away a table like that. I did not have an answer that would satisfy her. Not yet. Nobody standing in that lobby that night had any idea what was about to happen. Every video on this channel is about someone who trusted a feeling they could not yet explain. If you know that feeling, hit subscribe because there is a new one every week. Here is where the night actually began. My name is Marisol, and at the time all of this happened, I was 3 weeks into a job at a place called Halden and Root, a steakhouse in a part of town where the parking lot alone had more luxury vehicles than my entire neighborhood combined. My manager was a woman named Denise, somewhere in her 50s, who had run that dining room for 11 years and had a reputation for being fair to a fault. She was not the kind of person who yelled. She was the kind of person who asked one quiet question that made you realize you had messed up, and that was somehow worse. I took the job because it paid almost double what I had been making at a diner across town, and because Denise told me during the interview that she did not care where I came from, she cared whether I could read a table. At the time, I thought that was just something managers say. I did not know yet how literally she meant it, or how much that skill would end up mattering. The night in question was a Thursday, which at Halden and Root was never actually slow, no matter what the reservation book said. We had maybe 14 tables sat by 7 in the evening, a private party of 8 in the back room, celebrating a retirement, and a steady trickle of regulars who tipped well and complained about nothing. I was running Section 3, which was 4 tables along the front window, the ones with the best view of the parking lot and the worst acoustics in the entire restaurant. The family came in around 8:15. I noticed them before they even reached the host stand because of how they moved. Wealthy people who are actually comfortable with their money tend to walk into a restaurant like they own the air in the room. These 5 did not walk like that. They walked like people trying to remember choreography. There was a man who did all the talking, tall gray at the temples, wearing a suit that fit him almost too well, the kind of fit that comes from a tailor rather than a rack. But his shoes told a different story. The soles were worn down unevenly on the outside edge, the kind of wear you get from years in work boots, not from a life spent in leather dress shoes. I only noticed because I had grown up around men who worked construction, and I knew exactly what that particular slant in a shoe meant. Beside him was a woman I assumed was his wife, dripping in jewelry that looked real enough from a distance, but her rings did not match. Not in style, not in era, not in the way a woman accumulates jewelry over decades of marriage and gifts. They looked like they had all been purchased within the same week from different counters by someone in a hurry. Then there were 3 young people, 2 who looked to be around 16 or 17, laughing and glancing at their phones the way any teenager does, comfortable, bored, normal. And then there was a 4th young person, a girl who looked maybe 15, standing slightly behind the rest of them, wearing a dress that did not quite fit her the way the others' clothes fit them. She was not looking at a phone. She was not looking at anything in particular. Her eyes moved across the room in a pattern I recognized instantly, though at the time I could not have told you why, only that I had seen that same pattern of scanning before in exactly one other place in my life, and it had ended badly. The man reached the host stand and said they had a reservation under the name Whitfield, party of 5. Our host, a college kid named Tomas, checked the book and confirmed it, then reached for 5 menus. That is when I stepped forward, before I had fully decided to do it, and said the dining room was full. Tomas looked at me. The reservation book was sitting open in front of him, showing 3 open tables in section 3, alone. He started to say something, and I cut him off, telling the family that unfortunately we were experiencing a delay and it might be a 45-minute wait, even though I had no authority whatsoever to say that to a paying guest with a confirmed reservation. The man's expression did not change much. He said that seemed strange, given how many empty tables he could see, and he was right to say it, because he could see exactly what I could see. I told him I was sorry for the inconvenience, and that I would check with my manager. That last part, at least, turned out to be true, because Denise appeared less than a minute later, drawn by the sound of a confirmed reservation, somehow turning into a customer, standing in the lobby looking confused. Denise asked Tomas what was happening. Tomas, to his credit, simply said that Marisol told the Whitfield party the restaurant was full. Denise looked past him, at the dining room, at the 3 visibly empty tables in my section, and then at me. Her voice was calm, the way it always was, but there was an edge underneath it that I had not heard from her before. She asked me directly why I had just turned away a table of 5 with a confirmed reservation in front of the party themselves, when we clearly had room. I did not have an answer that would satisfy her. What I had was a feeling sitting in my chest, like a stone, built out of a pair of wrong shoes, mismatched rings, and the way one girl in that group was scanning the room like she was counting exits instead of admiring the chandelier. None of that was something I could say out loud in front of the Whitfield family without sounding either insane or insulting, possibly both. And Denise was still waiting for me to say something. The man, to his credit, remained polite through all of this, saying he understood restaurants got busy and he did not want to cause a problem. He was simply confused about the empty tables. His wife smiled the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes and said maybe they should just try somewhere else, and started to turn slightly toward the door. That was the moment something in me refused to let this end quietly, because if they walked out that door, whatever I had almost seen in that girl's eyes would walk out with them, and I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether I had imagined it. So instead of apologizing and letting Tomas seat them at table 9 like nothing had happened, I looked directly at Denise and said the 6 words I had absolutely no plan for saying 2 seconds earlier. I said, "Please, just give me 1 minute." Denise had 11 years of experience reading rooms, reading staff, and reading exactly which arguments were worth her time on a Thursday night with a full dining room and a party of 8 in the back, celebrating somebody's retirement. She had never once seen me act like this, not in 3 weeks, not in any of the small tests every new server gets put through without knowing it. Whatever she saw on my face in that moment made her pause instead of simply overruling me on the spot, and in a restaurant like Halden and Root, on a night that busy. A pause like that was the only opening I was ever going to get. Denise did not say yes right away. She looked at the Whitfield family, then back at me, then made a decision that I would later understand cost her something, because in that industry, undermining a server in front of a guest was rare, but overruling a server in front of a guest you barely knew was rarer still. She told the family she apologized for the confusion and asked if they would not mind waiting at the bar for just a few minutes while she sorted out a seating issue, on the house, drinks included. The man agreed, mostly, I think, because his wife had already given him a look that said she wanted to leave, and free drinks bought a few more minutes of patience. Once they were settled at the bar, out of earshot, Denise pulled me into the little hallway by the walk-in cooler, the same spot every manager in that restaurant used when they needed to have a conversation that was not for the dining room to hear. She crossed her arms and asked me calmly to explain what exactly I thought I was doing, because from where she stood, I had just embarrassed the restaurant in front of 5 paying guests for no reason she could identify. I told her the truth, which was that I did not have a full explanation yet, only pieces. I told her about the shoes, worn down on the outside edge in a pattern that did not match the rest of the man's clothing. I told her about the rings on the wife's hand, 4 of them, all looking freshly purchased, none of them looking like they belonged to the same person's history. And I told her about the youngest girl, the one who did not touch her phone, the one whose eyes moved across the room in slow, deliberate arcs, the way you scan a place when you are trying to memorize it rather than enjoy it. Denise listened to all of this without interrupting, which I would later learn was one of her defining qualities as a manager. When I finished, she asked me the question I did not have an answer for. She asked what any of that actually proved. A man could wear old shoes with a new suit for 100 innocent reasons. A woman could buy new jewelry the same week for a birthday, an anniversary, an apology. And a nervous teenager could simply be nervous, dragged along to a dinner she did not want to attend, scanning the room out of boredom or social anxiety rather than anything sinister. She was not being dismissive when she said this. She was being exactly what the situation called for, which was reasonable. If I had been standing where she stood, hearing what I had just told her, with nothing else to go on, I would have made the same call she was about to make, which was to seat the family, apologize for the mix-up, and move on with the night. I understood that, even as she was saying it, she was not wrong to think that way. She simply did not have the same 3 seconds of eye contact with that girl that I had, and there was no way for me to hand her that moment the way it had happened to me. I asked her for one thing. I asked if I could be the one to seat them and to take their table personally, instead of passing them off to another server, so that I could watch a little longer before anything happened that I could not undo. Denise studied me for a long moment. She told me later, once everything was over, that the reason she agreed was not because she believed my theory, whatever it even was at that point, but because in 3 weeks of working under her, she had never once seen me invent a problem to avoid work. And inventing a problem was, if anything, more work than simply seating a table and moving on. That inconsistency was enough to buy me a few more minutes. She agreed, on one condition. She told me if anything went wrong, if the Whitfield family complained, if corporate got a phone call about a new server turning away a confirmed reservation and then hovering over their table all night, the consequences would land on me, not on her, and not on the restaurant. I told her I understood, and I meant it, though understanding the stakes and actually feeling them settle into my stomach were 2 very different things. I walked back into the dining room and told the family their table was ready. The man thanked me, politely, no trace of resentment in his voice, though his wife's smile had gone thin and tight, the smile of someone doing math about how the rest of the evening was going to go. I sat them at table 6, which was in my section, close enough to the kitchen pass that I could glance over between other tables without it looking unusual. The 2 older teenagers sat down first, still glued to their phones, unaffected by any of the tension that had just played out at the host stand. The man and his wife sat across from each other, and the youngest girl, the one I had been watching without fully understanding why, sat at the end of the table, closest to the aisle, in the seat with the clearest view of the front door. I noticed that detail immediately, because it was the same seat I would have chosen if I wanted to know exactly who was coming and going at all times. It was not the seat of 15-year-old Pix when she wants to be close to her family or close to a window with a nice view. It was the seat of someone keeping track of exits, and once I saw her choose it without hesitation, without any of the group even discussing seating arrangements, the small stone of certainty in my chest got heavier. I took their drink order. The man asked for a bottle of wine from our upper shelf, something in the $120 range, and did not so much as glance at the price on the menu before pointing to it. His wife ordered a cocktail with a name I had to look up on the recipe card behind the bar because I had never made one before. The two older teenagers ordered sodas. The youngest girl asked only for water, and when I asked if she wanted lemon in it, she looked up at me for the first time all night and said, "No, thank you," in a voice so quiet I had to lean in slightly to hear it over the noise of the dining room. It was in that brief exchange, less than 10 seconds long, that I noticed the first thing I could actually describe out loud without sounding like I was inventing a mystery novel in my head. Her nails. All 4 of the women and girls sitting in that section that night, across the whole dining room, had some version of manicured nails, the kind that costs money and time and comes from regular visits to a salon. The wife had a fresh manicure, deep red, no chips. The 2 older teenagers had the kind of casual gel polish that high schoolers get for homecoming and prom season, but this girl had nothing. Her nails were bitten down close to the skin on 2 fingers, uneven, unpainted, the kind of nails that come from anxiety rather than neglect. I brought their drinks and took the rest of their order without lingering too long at the table, aware that Denise could look over at any moment and see whether I was doing my job normally or hovering in a way that would raise more questions than it answered. The man ordered a large platter for the table to share, several steaks, sides for everyone, without asking anyone else what they wanted first, which was not by itself unusual for a father footing the bill, but combined with everything else. It fit a pattern forming in the back of my mind that I still could not fully name. As I walked back toward the kitchen with their order, I passed close enough to the bar to catch Denise watching me, not with suspicion exactly, but with the particular attention of someone waiting to see whether the thing she had allowed to happen was going to blow up in both of our faces. I gave her a small nod, the kind that meant I still did not have proof, but I had not changed my mind either. She held my gaze for a second longer than necessary before turning back to the guest she had been helping at the service well. If you have ever caught a detail so small that you could not even explain to yourself why it mattered, only that it refused to leave you alone, tell me about it below, because that feeling is exactly what kept pulling me back to that table all night, even though every rational part of my brain agreed with Denise that I had nothing solid to stand on yet. I put their order in and went to check my other tables, a couple celebrating an anniversary in Section 3, and a pair of regulars who tipped in cash and always asked for me by name. I moved through my usual motions, refilling waters, clearing bread plates, all the small mechanical tasks that make up most of a serving shift, but some part of my attention never fully left table 6. I found myself timing my trips near that section of the dining room, angling my body so I could see the youngest girl without obviously staring, cataloging small things the way you catalog anything you are afraid you will lose the chance to notice. She did not eat much when the food arrived. She cut small pieces of her steak and moved them around the plate more than she actually ate them. At one point, the man reached over and said something to her quietly, and she nodded and took a bite, chewing slowly, watching him the entire time, the way a child watches a parent, to gauge whether the required performance has been sufficient. That look was the second thing I could describe out loud without embellishment. It was not fear, exactly. It was closer to calculation, the look of someone constantly measuring whether they were doing enough to avoid a consequence I could not see. Halfway through the meal, she asked to be excused to use the restroom. The man said something to her I did not catch, and she nodded again, then stood and walked toward the back hallway where the restrooms were located, alone. I told myself I would not follow her back there, that it would look strange for a server to trail a 15-year-old girl toward the restrooms, and strange behavior was exactly the kind of thing that could turn a vague feeling into a genuine complaint against me. Instead, I found a reason to be near the back hallway anyway, carrying a stack of clean silverware toward the server station that happened to sit only a few steps from the restroom doors. She was in there longer than a normal trip would take, long enough that I refilled the silverware bin twice, slower than necessary, listening for the door. When she finally came out, her eyes were red at the rims, the kind of red that comes from crying quietly and then splashing cold water on your face to try to hide it. She saw me standing there, and her whole body went still for half a second, the way an animal goes still when it senses it has been spotted. I asked her, as gently as I could manage while still sounding like a server making conversation, whether everything was okay. She said yes, very quickly, too quickly, and told me the restaurant was just warm. It was not warm. If anything, the air conditioning in that back hallway ran cold enough that servers kept a sweater on the coat rack by the walk-in specifically because of it. I did not push further. I only told her that if she needed anything, water, more napkins, anything at all, she should just ask me directly, and I would take care of it. It was a small thing to say, the kind of line any server might say to any guest, but I said it slowly enough and looked at her long enough that I hoped it carried a second meaning underneath the first one. She looked at me for a moment, that stretched half a second past, comfortable, and something in her face shifted, not into relief exactly, but into the recognition that at least one person in that building had noticed something was wrong, even if neither of us had said what. She walked back to the table. I gave it 30 seconds before following at a normal pace, resuming my rounds as though nothing had happened. It was maybe 20 minutes later that things accelerated in a way I had not planned for. I was clearing plates from the anniversary couple in Section 3 when I heard raised voices from Table 6, not shouting exactly, but the kind of sharp, controlled tone that carries across a quiet dining room even when the person using it is trying to keep it contained. I looked over to see the man leaning across the table toward the youngest girl, his jaw tight, saying something I could not fully hear, though I caught the tail end of it. He said something about how she needed to remember why they were there, and how tonight was not the night to embarrass everyone. The two older teenagers had gone quiet, eyes down on their plates, the practiced stillness of people who had seen this kind of moment before and knew the safest thing to do was disappear into their own food. The wife reached over and put a hand on the man's arm, murmuring something, and he sat back, exhaling hard through his nose, the posture of a man forcing himself to de-escalate in public because a scene was bad for business, whatever that business actually was. The girl did not cry again. She just went very still, staring down at her plate. Her jaw locked tight in a way that told me she had learned a long time ago that the safest response to that particular tone of voice was silence. I approached the table under the excuse of asking whether anyone needed anything else, refilling waters that did not need refilling, buying myself 30 seconds inside the orbit of that conversation. The man straightened up immediately when he saw me, sliding back into the same polished, easy warmth he had shown at the host stand earlier, thanking me for checking in. "Everything is wonderful," he said. "The steak is perfect." His wife smiled the same tight smile from before. The girl did not look up at all. I went back to the kitchen with an armful of empty bread plates and stood at the pass for a moment longer than I needed to, trying to organize the pieces I now had. A man whose shoes did not match his suit, a wife with jewelry that looked purchased all at once rather than collected over years. A girl who chose the seat closest to the door, who did not touch her nails, who cried quietly in a restroom and lied about why, who flinched into silence the moment a certain tone entered a man's voice. None of it was proof of anything specific. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as though I had it all figured out in that moment, and I did not. What I had was a shape, the outline of something wrong, without yet knowing exactly what kind of wrong it was. I did not know if this was a custody situation, a family under financial strain doing something desperate, or something far worse that I did not want to let myself think about directly. What I knew was that the feeling in my chest had stopped being a vague suspicion and had become something closer to certainty, even without a name attached to it yet. Denise found me standing at the pass longer than the ticket times justified, and asked quietly whether I was going to tell her what was actually happening at that table, because from where she stood, it looked like a family having a normal, if slightly tense, dinner, and slightly tense family dinners were not, on their own, grounds for a server to be circling a table like a hawk all night. I told her what I had just seen, the raised voice, the comment about not embarrassing everyone, the girl going silent and still. Denise's face changed slightly when I described that, not into alarm, but into the focused attention of someone taking a report seriously, even while remaining skeptical of the conclusion. She reminded me, not unkindly, that families argued in restaurants all the time. Fathers snapped at teenagers over table manners, over phones, over grades, over 100 ordinary things, and none of that alone justified what I had already done at the host stand, let alone anything further. She was right, and I told her she was right, because she was. If someone had described this exact scene to me cold, without the shoes, without the rings, without the restroom, without the seat by the door, I would have said it sounded like an ordinary, strained family dinner too. The problem was that I had all of those pieces stacked on top of each other now, and stacked together. They stopped looking ordinary to me, even if I still could not explain to Denise, in a way that would satisfy a reasonable manager running a busy restaurant on a Thursday night, exactly why. If you have ever had a moment where every small detail on its own seemed explainable, but together refused to add up to anything innocent, I want you to sit with that feeling for a second before you keep reading, because that is exactly the corner I had backed myself into, standing at that kitchen pass with no plan and a manager running out of patience. Denise told me, and I could hear in her voice that this was not a threat so much as a genuine statement of where things stood, that if I did anything else to disrupt that table, anything at all, she would have to pull me off the floor for the rest of the night, and we would deal with the consequences of the host stand incident tomorrow in her office with her regional manager, likely on the phone. She was not saying this to punish me. She was saying it because a dining room does not run on gut feelings. It runs on tickets going out on time and guests feeling comfortable, and I had already put both of those things at risk once tonight. I told her I understood, and I went back out to the floor, because I did not yet have anything more concrete to offer her, and a manager cannot run a restaurant on someone else's unproven instinct, however strong that instinct feels from the inside. I refilled waters at my other tables. I dropped a dessert menu at the anniversary table. I smiled and made small talk with my cash-tipping regulars, all while some part of my mind stayed fixed on table 6, waiting for the next piece to surface, because I had started to believe, without being able to say why, that the night was not finished handing them to me yet. It was maybe 15 minutes later, while I was clearing the shared platter of steak bones and empty side dishes from their table, that the girl reached for her water glass, and her sleeve slid back slightly on her wrist. It was there for less than 2 seconds before she noticed and pulled the sleeve back down, but 2 seconds was enough. What I saw on her wrist, in that brief window before her sleeve slid back down, was a bruise. Not one bruise, but a cluster of them, faint yellow-green at the edges and darker toward the center, arranged in a pattern that did not look like the kind of mark you get from bumping into a doorframe or falling off a bike. It looked like the shape a hand makes when it grips something and grips it hard, more than once. I did not say anything in that moment. I finished clearing the plates, stacked them carefully on my tray, and walked back toward the kitchen with my pulse loud in my own ears. I did not run. I did not let my face change in front of the table. Whatever training I had gotten in 3 weeks at Halden and Root had not covered this, but something older than that training, some instinct that had nothing to do with waiting tables, told me that the worst thing I could do right now was let anyone at that table see that I had noticed anything at all. Once I was behind the kitchen doors, out of sight of the dining room, I set the tray down harder than I meant to, and one of the line cooks glanced over at me, asking if I was all right. I told him I was fine and asked him to give me a second. I stood there with both hands flat on the stainless steel counter, steadying myself, running through everything I had just seen, because I needed to be sure as I could be without a medical degree, that I was not simply seeing what I wanted to see after an entire night of building a theory out of shoes and jewelry and body language. But bruises like that, in a pattern like that, on a 15-year-old girl who scanned rooms for exits and did not touch her own nails and cried quietly in a restroom and lied about why and went completely still at a certain tone of voice from the man sitting across from her, those bruises did not fit anywhere else. They fit exactly one story, and it was the story I had been trying not to think directly about since the moment she chose that seat by the door. I went to find Denise. She was at the host stand, checking the wait list for the second seating, and when she saw my face, whatever composure I had been holding onto in the kitchen must have slipped, because she stepped away from Thomas immediately and asked me what happened. I told her, quietly, standing close enough that no passing guest could overhear. I told her about the bruises, the pattern of them, where they sat on the wrist, the way she had yanked her sleeve back down the second she noticed I had seen. Denise did not interrupt me this time. She listened with the stillness of someone doing rapid, careful math in her head, weighing 11 years of experience against a version of a story she had never personally had to act on before. When I finished, she asked me one question, calm and direct. She asked if I was completely certain about what I had seen, because once she made a call based on what I was telling her, there would be no taking it back quietly. I told her I could not be completely certain, not in a way that would hold up as proof, but I told her I did not think I was wrong. And more importantly, I told her that even if there was only a real chance I was right, I did not think either of us could live with doing nothing and finding out later that we had let her walk out that door. Denise closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment, the kind of pause a person takes when they are about to do something they know might blow up in their face professionally, and she opened them again, already moving. She told me to go back to the table and act completely normal, to bring the check like everything was fine, and to give her exactly 10 minutes. I asked her what she was going to do. She told me she was calling the restaurant's emergency contact line, which for situations like this connected directly to local law enforcement's non-emergency dispatch, a protocol every manager at Halden and Root had been trained on, but that, as far as I knew, none of us had ever actually had to use. She said she was not calling because she was certain either. She was calling because certainty was not the standard here. Reasonable concern was, and we had more than enough of that now. I want to pause here and say clearly, because it matters, that if you are ever in a position where you notice something like this, marks that do not add up. A child who goes silent and small around a certain adult. Behavior that does not fit the story being told around it. You do not need to be certain to say something. You do not need proof. You need exactly what Denise had in that moment, a reasonable concern and the willingness to let someone whose job it is to investigate take it from there. I went back out to the dining room and did exactly what Denise told me to do. I smiled at the table, asked if they had saved room for dessert, and when the man declined, said he thought they should probably get going. I nodded and told him I would bring the check right out. My hands were steady in a way that surprised me, not because I was calm, but because some part of me understood that steady hands were the only thing standing between this family and whoever was on the other end of that phone call. Denise was making somewhere behind the kitchen. The wife asked for the coats to be brought from the coat check near the front, and I said I would take care of it personally. As I walked toward the front of the restaurant, I passed close enough to the manager's office to see Denise through the half-open door, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low, controlled voice, giving what sounded like a description, a location, a table number. I got the coats and brought them back to the table, laying them carefully over the backs of each chair. When I got to the youngest girl's coat, I held it open for her the way you would for any guest, and as she stood to put her arms through the sleeves, I leaned in slightly and said, quiet enough that only she could hear it, that if she ever needed help, at any restaurant, any store, anywhere, all she had to do was tell someone she had left something behind and needed to go back inside alone. She froze for half a second, coat halfway on, and looked at me. I do not know exactly what she saw on my face in that moment, but something in her posture changed, some fraction of tension leaving her shoulders, as though she had just understood, for the first time that night, that at least one adult in that building had seen her clearly. I handed the man the check. He paid quickly, in cash, tipping generously, the kind of overly generous tip that people leave when they want a place to remember them fondly, rather than remember them at all. He thanked me for a wonderful evening, and told me, with what sounded like genuine warmth, that he hoped the mix-up at the door had not caused too much trouble. I told him it was no trouble at all, and I meant that in a way he could not possibly have understood. They stood to leave. The wife gathered her purse. The two older teenagers put their phones away and stood, stretching, already talking about something unrelated to the last hour, and the youngest girl walked toward the door slightly behind the rest of them, the same position she had held all night, the position of someone always positioned to see the exit before anyone else did. That is when I saw two police cruisers pull into the parking lot outside, their lights not flashing, moving slowly, deliberately, the way vehicles move when the people inside them do not want to alarm anyone before they are ready to. The man saw the cruisers a half second before his wife did, and I watched something shift across his face. Not panic, exactly, more like the practiced calm of a person recalculating an exit strategy in real time. He put a hand lightly on the small of his wife's back and said something about how it looked like someone had called about a fender bender in the lot. Nothing to do with them. They should just head to the car. Denise came out from the office at almost the same moment, walking toward the front doors at a pace that was fast without looking like she was hurrying. The walk of someone who had spent 11 years learning how to move through a room without causing alarm. She reached the host stand just as two officers stepped inside, a man and a woman, both in plain patrol uniforms, unhurried, professional, scanning the lobby the way people do when they already have a description in mind and are matching it against the room. The female officer's eyes moved past the two older teenagers, past the man, past the wife, and stopped on the youngest girl, standing slightly behind them all, coat only halfway zipped, closest to the door, exactly where she had positioned herself all night. The man stepped forward immediately, polished and calm, asking if there was some kind of problem, telling the officers they were just finishing up a family dinner and heading home. The female officer was polite in return, but firm, asking if they could speak with him for a moment outside, while her partner had a quick word with the rest of the family inside. It was phrased as a request. It was not, in practice, optional. What happened over the next 20 minutes did not happen in front of me the way the rest of the night had. Denise asked me to step back into the kitchen and let her handle the direct conversation with the officers, since I was, in her words, a witness now, and witnesses did not need to be standing in the middle of an active situation. I did as she asked, though I stood close enough to the pass window to see fragments of it through the gap in the kitchen doors. I saw the female officer crouch down slightly to speak with the girl at eye level, her posture open, unthreatening, the two of them talking for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few minutes. I saw the girl's shoulders shaking at one point, and the officer placing a hand gently on her arm, not the grip of a hand pulling her anywhere, but the kind of steady contact that says you are safe now without needing to say the words out loud. I found out most of what actually happened only afterward, first from Denise that same night, and then more fully about 10 days later, when the same female officer came back to the restaurant on her own time to thank Denise and me personally and to tell us, within the limits of what she was legally allowed to share, how the story had actually unfolded. The girl was not, in fact, the man's biological daughter, and she was not related to the two older teenagers at all. She had been reported missing by a relative in another state nearly 4 months earlier, after being removed from that relative's home, under circumstances the officer did not go into detail about. The man was not a stranger who had taken her off the street. He was someone who had inserted himself into her life through an online relationship with a woman he claimed to be helping, someone struggling and vulnerable, and had over several months positioned himself as a family friend, then a guardian, then something closer to ownership. The wife was, as far as investigators could tell at that point, either unaware of the full picture or unwilling to see it clearly, though that part of the investigation was still open. The physical proof that made everything move as fast as it did was not my observation of shoes or rings or seating choices, and the officer was careful, gently, to make that clear to me. Those things had given Denise a reason to make a call worth taking seriously, and that mattered enormously. But what confirmed everything, what turned a reasonable concern into an actual case, was the bruising pattern I had seen on the girl's wrist, photographed and documented that same night by the responding officers, along with older, healing marks found during the medical examination that followed, marks consistent with repeated restraint over an extended period of time. There was also, it turned out, a partial fingerprint record on file from an unrelated incident months earlier involving the man, one that matched cleanly once investigators pulled it for comparison. That was the proof that held up in the way proof needs to hold up: physical, documented, undeniable in a courtroom, regardless of how anyone felt about it. The man was arrested that night, outside, in the parking lot, without incident, though the officer told us he tried for several minutes to explain the whole situation away as a misunderstanding between an overprotective new stepfather and a troubled teenager acting out. The wife was not arrested that night, but the investigation into what she knew and when continued for months afterward, and I never learned the full outcome of that part, since it was not something the officer was able to share with people outside the family. The girl was placed with Child Protective Services that same night, and eventually, I was told, reunited with the relative who had reported her missing though the officer kept those details deliberately vague, out of respect for the girl's privacy going forward. I never learned her real name. I never saw her again after that night. But I think about the moment she looked at me while I held her coat open, and the small shift in her shoulders when she understood that someone had actually seen her more often than I think about almost anything else from that entire year. Denise never once threw the host stand incident back in my face after that night, not in front of other staff, not in private, not even as a joke. If anything, she started giving me a strange kind of trust I had not earned yet in any traditional sense. The trust you give someone after they have proven once that their instincts are worth listening to even when they cannot fully explain them. A few months later, when a new hire made a call on the floor that seemed strange on the surface, Denise did not immediately overrule her. She asked her to explain, the same way she had once asked me, and she listened all the way through before deciding what to do next. I still work at Halden and Root. I still watch tables a little differently than most servers do, not out of suspicion of every family that walks through the door, but because I know now what it costs to look away from a small detail that does not fit, and I know what it costs, some nights, to trust one that does. The bottle of wine the man ordered that night sat unfinished on the table when the officers came in. Denise poured it out herself later, after everyone had gone, standing alone at the service well, and she told me the smell of it stayed with her for weeks afterward, longer than she expected a smell like that to last. If a story like this one meant something to you, I put up a new one every week about ordinary people who paid a real price for trusting what they knew before anyone else believed them. I will see you in the next one.